Hello, my beautiful audience. Welcome to another episode of Pass the Time Podcast, because there's no better way to pass the time than by listening to Pass the Time Podcast. Now, today on the show, I'm going to be reading Mr. Widemouth and Daddy's Little Angel. Now, I'm doing a blind read this time, which means I haven't pre-read these ones, so I'm going to be just as surprised as you to find the outcomes. But before we get to those, let's jump on into our horror fix. In today's segment of Horror Fix, I'd like to talk about two movies instead of a movie and a game because I'm very excited about both of these movies. Now, this first movie has been out for a little while now. It's starring Ryan Reynolds and it's called Voices. He plays a schizophrenic who talks to his animals. Sounds scary? Just wait. They actually tell him to kill people, and I believe he's a serial killer in the movie. He works at like a bathtub factory, which is kind of strange, but the trailer looks pretty good. That'll be on the Facebook page if you want to check that out. It also has Anna Kendrick, so even if you don't like Ryan Reynolds, there's still some eye candy in the movie for you. Now, the second movie I want to talk about, I'm very excited about, even more than Voices. It's called Demonic, aka House of Horror. It was written and produced by James Wan, of course, of Saw and Insidious, and love both those movies, so hopefully this one lives up to the hype. This one looks like it'll be shot regularly, but they integrate some found footage aspects, which I like. This movie stars Frank Grillo, who played the trainer, or the guy who trained Joel Edgerton in Warrior, so he's a pretty good actor. I've always liked him. And Dustin Milligan, who you might know from movies like Shark Night 3D or Beverly Hills 90210. He played Ethan in that. And so Frank Grillo, he has to investigate these 5 murders in this supposedly haunted house, and the 5 people that were murdered were friends of Dustin Milligan, and they went there to kind of find and film ghosts. And of course, it didn't turn out so well for them. So you can check out that trailer as well on our Facebook page. If you like a good scare, then Demonic is the movie for you. Now, before we jump into the creepypastas, I just wanted to talk a little bit about some funny experiences I've had at my work. Have you ever watched the episode of Family Guy where Peter has like a war vet over? It's just one of the cutaways, of course, and he's missing a leg, and he keeps commenting on it. Now, that kind of happened to me in real life. I was at work, and a guy, he had one of those kind of bum hands. It was like really small, and didn't have a problem with it. I was just like, oh, that's kind of crazy. And so I was helping the guy out and grabbing him a book, and he has 2 hands, but for some reason he wanted me to give him the book to his smaller hand. I thought that was kind of weird, and he kept kind of like dropping it, so he wouldn't use his good hand, so I wasn't sure if he was messing with me, but at the same time, I kept asking, oh, do you need a hand with this? Do you need a hand with that? Oh, let me give you a hand. And so I couldn't keep myself from saying hand, which is what I'm trying to get at here, and it made it incredibly awkward. So if you're listening out there, I'm sorry I referenced your hand so many times. So that's just my little funny / awkward story of the day. Now it's time for the real scary stuff, people. Are you ready? This is Mr. Widemouth by Perfect Circle 35. During my childhood, my family was like a drop of water in a vast river, never remaining in one location for long. We settled in Rhode Island when I was 8, and there we remained until I went to college in Colorado Springs. Most of my memories were rooted in Rhode Island, but there are fragments in the attic of my brain which belong to the various homes we'd lived in when I was much younger. Most of these memories are unclear and pointless, chasing after another boy in the backyard of a house in North Carolina, trying to build a raft to float along a creek beyond the apartment we rented in Pennsylvania, and so on. But there is one set of memories which remains as clear as glass, as though they were made just yesterday. I often wonder whether these memories are simply lucid dreams produced by the long sickness I experienced that spring, but in my heart, I know they're real. We were living in a house just outside the bustling metropolis of New Vineyard, Maine. Population, 643. It was a large structure, especially for a family of 3. There were a number of rooms that I didn't see in the 5 months we resided there. In some ways, it was a waste of space, but it was the only house on the market at the time, at least within an hour's commute to my father's workplace. The day after my 5th birthday, attended by my parents alone, I came down with a fever. The doctor said I had maniculosis. which meant no rough play and more fever for at least another 3 weeks. It was horrible timing being bedridden. We were in the process of packing our things to move to Pennsylvania, and most of my things were already packed away in boxes, leaving my room barren. My mother brought me ginger ale and books several times a day. These served the function of being my primary form of entertainment for the next few weeks. Boredom always loomed just around the corner, waiting to rear its ugly head and compound my misery. I don't exactly recall how I met Mr. Widemouth. I think it was about a week after I was diagnosed with mono. My first memory of the small creature was asking him if he had a name. He told me to call him Mr. Widemouth because his mouth was very large. In fact, everything about him was large in comparison to his body. His head, his eyes, his crooked ears, but his mouth was by far the largest. "You look kind of like a Furby," I said as he flipped through one of my books. Mr. Widemouth stopped and gave me a puzzled look. "Furby? What's a Furby?" he asked. I shrugged. "You know, the toy. The little robot with big ears. You can pet and feed them, almost like a real pet." "Oh." Mr. Widemouth resumed his activity. "You don't need one of those. They aren't the same as having a real friend." I remember Mr. Widemouth disappearing every time my mother stopped to check in on me. "I lay under your bed," he later explained. "I don't want your parents to see me because I'm afraid they won't let us play anymore." We didn't do much during those first few days. Mr. Widemouth just looked at my books, fascinated by the stories and pictures they contained. The third or fourth morning after I met him, he greeted me with a large smile on his face. "I have a new game we can play," he said. "We have to wait until your mother comes in to check on you, because she can't see us play it. It's a secret game." After my mother delivered more books and soda at the usual time, Mr. Widemouth slipped out from under my bed and tugged my hand. "We have to go to the room at the end of this hallway," he said. I objected at first, as my parents had forbidden me to leave my bed without their permission, but Mr. Widemouth persisted until I gave in. The room in question had no furniture or wallpaper. Its only distinguishing feature was a window opposite the doorway. Mr. Widemouth darted across the room and gave the window a firm push, flinging it open. He then beckoned me to look out into the ground below. We were on the second story of the house, but it was on a hill, and from this angle, the drop was farther than 2 stories due to the incline. "I like to play pretend up here," Mr. Widemouth explained. "I pretend that there's a big, soft trampoline below the window, and I jump. If you pretend hard enough, you bounce back up like a feather. I want you to try." I was a 5-year-old with a fever, so only a hint of skepticism darted through my thoughts as I looked down and considered the possibility. "It's a long drop," I said. "But that's all part of the fun. It wouldn't be fun if it was only a short drop. If it were that way, you might as well just jump on a real trampoline." I toyed with the idea, picturing myself falling through the air only to bounce back to the window on something unseen by human eyes. But the realist in me prevailed. "Maybe some other time," I said. "I don't know if I have enough imagination. I could get hurt." Mr. Widemouth's face contorted into a snarl, but only for a moment. Anger gave way to disappointment. "If you say so," he said. He spent the rest of the day under my bed, quiet as a mouse. The following morning, Mr. Widemouth arrived holding a small box. "I want to teach you to juggle," he said. "There are some things you can use to practice before I start giving you lessons." I looked in the box. It was full of knives. "My parents will kill me," I shouted, horrified that Mr. Widemouth had brought knives into my room, objects that my parents would never allow me to touch. I'd be spanked and grounded for a year. Mr. Widemouth frowned. "It's fun to juggle with these. I want you to try it." I pushed the box away. "I can't. I'll get in trouble. Knives aren't safe to be thrown up in the air." Mr. Widemouth's frown deepened into a scowl. He took the box of knives and slid under my bed, remaining there for the rest of the day. I began to wonder how often he was under me. I started having trouble sleeping after that. Mr. Widemouth often woke me up at night, saying he put a real trampoline under the window, a big one I couldn't see in the dark. I always declined and tried to go back to sleep, but Mr. Widemouth persisted. Sometimes he stayed by my side until early in the morning, encouraging me to jump. He wasn't so fun to play with anymore. My mother came to me one morning and told me I had her permission to walk around outside. She thought the fresh air would be good for me, especially after being confined in my room for so long. Ecstatic, I put on my sneakers and trotted out the back porch, yearning for the feeling of sun on my face. Mr. Widemouth was waiting for me. "I have something I want you to see," he said. I must have given him a weird look, because he then said, "It's safe. I promise." I followed him to the beginning of a deer trail which ran through the woods behind the house. "This is an important path," he explained. I've had a lot of friends about your age. When they were ready, I took them down this path to a special place. You aren't ready yet, but one day I hope to take you there. I returned to the house, wondering what kind of place lay beyond the trail. 2 weeks after I met Mr. Widemouth, the last load of our things had been packed into a moving truck. I would be in the cab of that truck, sitting next to my father for the long drive to Pennsylvania. I considered telling Mr. Widemouth that I would be leaving, but even at 5 years old, I was beginning to suspect that perhaps the creature's intentions were not to my benefit, despite what he said otherwise. For this reason, I decided to keep my departure a secret. My father and I were in the truck at 4 a.m. He was hoping to make it to Pennsylvania by lunchtime tomorrow, with the help of an endless supply of coffee and a 6-pack of energy drinks. He seemed more like a man who was about to run a marathon rather than one who was about to spend 2 days sitting still. "Early enough for you?" he asked. I nodded and placed my head against the window, hoping for some sleep before the sun came up. I felt my father's hand on my shoulder. "This is the last move, son. I promise. I know it's hard for you, as sick as you've been. Once Daddy gets promoted, we can settle down and you can make friends." I opened my eyes and we backed out of the driveway. I saw Mr. Widemouth's silhouette in my bedroom window. He stood motionless until the truck was about to turn onto the main road. He gave a pitiful little wave goodbye, steak knife in hand. I didn't wave back. Years later, I returned to New Vineyard. The piece of land our house stood upon was empty except for the foundation, as the house burnt down a few years after my family left. Out of curiosity, I followed the deer trail that Mr. Widemouth had shown me. Part of me expected him to jump out from behind a tree and scare the living bejesus out of me, but I felt that Mr. Widemouth was gone, somehow tied to the house that no longer existed. The trail ended at the New Vineyard Memorial Cemetery, and I noticed that many of the tombstones belonged to children. That was Mr. Widemouth by Perfect Circle 35. Now this got a 9.3 out of 10 on creepypasta.com, and I enjoyed the story a lot. I don't think I'd give it quite the 9.5. I'd probably give it an 8, and this is probably why. Most of the sentences in this story were about more than 20 words long. In fact, just scrolling through the first page, the first sentence in the second paragraph is 42 words long, and I had to really break up a lot of them and kind of put them into their own sentences, but that's probably just because this writer might not have the training that a lot of other writers do, but this is definitely a great start. Yeah, it's a great story, extremely imaginative, especially I like the perspective of the 5-year-old kid, because kids are always so naive and trusting, but even though this kid was so young, he still knew that this thing living kind of under his bed was still trying to fuck with him and literally kill him. But I thought it was extremely creative. I really enjoyed the story. My only real critique was, there's some grammar issues and then the super long sentences, but just everything other than that was pretty good. And anything involving kids is usually super creepy. And I like how the author kind of describe the Mr. Widemouth, but for the most part, they leave it up to your imagination, so you could be picturing something extremely creepy. Unfortunately for me, the first image that popped into my head was Mayor McCheese, so the entire time I kind of pictured Mayor McCheese trying to fit under this bed, and that image is kind of ridiculous, but I hope none of you pictured Mayor McCheese. If you picture something scary, it usually works a lot better. So mad props to Perfect Circle 35, giving you an 8 out of 10 to Mr. Widemouth. Now it's time for the next story. This one is called Daddy's Little Angel, and it's actually a pretty new one. Right now it has an 8.5 out of 10 on creepypasta.com, but that's only out of 226 votes, so we'll see how good it really is. Also, it was written by Chris Phoenix. Man, that's a pretty awesome pen name. Just thinking of a sweet backstory. Chris Phoenix rose from the ashes to produce Daddy's Little Angel. But enough jokes. It's time for Daddy's Little Angel. # Chris Phoenix. She has her mother's bright blue eyes, Daddy's little angel does, and the most beautiful smile you've ever seen. She could melt an iceberg, she could. Everyone that knows her just loves her to death, and I'm so proud to call myself her father. She's a gift from above, I know it, which is why I must protect her, no matter what the cost. Some people just don't understand. It all started a couple weeks ago. Some nasty little girl was teasing Katie, my little angel, and she just wouldn't leave her alone. She was saying nasty things, saying how poor she was, and saying she was dirty and such. She just had the filthiest mouth. Little girls shouldn't be so nasty. Well, she followed Katie home that day, throwing dirt at her and telling her to take a bath in it. Well, my Katie showed her what's what. Yes, she did. And Daddy couldn't be more proud. I don't think anyone should hurt a child, even if they don't mean it. Don't get me wrong, but Katie never did anything to anyone, and I love her to death. You've got to understand, I was only being a loving father when I hid the body. You see, we live in a very rural area, and the nasty-mouthed little girl clearly had no business following my Katie in the first place. But I know no one would understand, and I just can't let anything happen to my little angel. Of course, that's when my wife came home and saw that our little girl had a few bruises. Can you believe she actually glared at me? As if I'd ever so much as think of hurting my little angel? Of course I was upset, but the sweetheart that she is, Katie set her on her track, sure enough. She told her how the filthy little girl harassed her and wouldn't leave her be. And I tell you, that lit my wife right up. She was so angry. I had to restrain her. She was gonna call her parents then and there. It was 9 in the evening. Well, I finally talked her down, even though she was furious with me that I hadn't handled it sooner. Of course, by then she didn't trust me to settle it no matter what I told her. I said I'd do it first thing after work the next day, but no. She insisted she'd call them herself the next day. Even Katie pleaded with her not to call her parents. She said she'd be so embarrassed at school if anyone found out she'd run home and told Mommy. Of course we both knew we couldn't explain that filthy little girl had gone missing after their little scuffle, now could we? I mean, she's my wife and I loved her, but she just wouldn't understand. But she just sent Katie straight up to bed and wouldn't hear another word from me on the matter. Her mind was made up. And she's a very headstrong woman. It's part of her charm, you see. So there's no arguing with her when she's made up her mind on a matter. Well, after that, I went to tuck the little angel in and read her a bedtime story, and she begged me not to let Mommy call the filthy girl's parents. But I told her how persistent Mommy is, and that she wouldn't listen to me. Of course, that didn't sit well with Katie. Not at all. She knew that Mommy wouldn't understand, and neither would her schoolmate's Mommy. No, especially not her. I told Katie I would think of something, and I promised I wouldn't let anything happen to her. But Daddy's little angel is clever. Daddy's little angel already had her mind made up. I should have understood. The next day I came home to see my wife laying at the bottom of the stairs in a crumpled, bloody heap. There was so much blood, and it had long since dried into the carpet when I got home. She had never made it to work that morning. The official story was that she'd taken a nasty fall down the stairs and cracked her head open like an egg on her tumble. But as I look into Katie's eyes, so empty, so emotionless, No. Daddy's little angel didn't hurt anyone that didn't try to hurt her first. She's special. Anyhow, there was a funeral and the whole family showed up. Katie couldn't have been more bored. She just sat there staring into nothingness as the eulogy was given. When it came time to view the corpse, she barely gave it a glance. I like to think she's coping with the loss in her own way. Daddy's little angel loved her Mommy more than anything. It was just before the burial next day that the investigators showed up at the door. It was Katie that answered as I was rushing to get ready. I rushed to the door as the man was questioning my little girl, gently scooting Katie out of the way, and stepped up to the door. "May I help you?" I asked, trying to sound polite. "I need to ask you some questions about the circumstances of your wife's death," the investigator said. "Who are you?" I think some of my frustration was coming through, but it might have been my self-consciousness. "I'm sorry," he said with a laugh. "Detective Kimball, local PD. I just got the results back from the autopsy, and the blunt trauma your wife suffered and the bloodstains found on the carpet don't exactly match up. I was wondering if you could give me a little more insight." "Well, I'd love to, Detective, but as I told the responding officers, I only found the body when I came home from work. I wasn't here to see it happen." The detective tried to speak again, I think, but I cut him off. Frustration was filling me. "If you'll excuse me, we have a burial to attend." I grabbed Katie's hand and walked out the door, locking it behind me. I glanced back to see the detective was watching me as we drove away. Katie was silent the entire trip there and back, and as soon as we got home, she retreated into her room. The poor baby has it so rough. All this death surrounding her. I shampooed the carpet the best I could to get the stains out, then fixed up dinner for us. We ate in silence, and it filled me with pain to see her suffering. I'll never forget. Just before she got up to take her plate to the sink, she looked at me and smiled so softly. Oh, my little angel has the sweetest smile you'll ever see. A couple days passed and I thought things were getting back to normal. Well, as normal as they could be, without my beautiful wife to come home to when it happened. You see, I rush home each day to meet Katie as she's coming in from school. But yesterday I was lost in thought and took my time getting home. You see, the day before, my wife's sister suggested that she come over and bring Katie's cousin for a visit, and I just couldn't refuse. So I had to get in the mindset. I had to show her we were coping. The house was quiet when I got there, but that wasn't so unusual, as Daddy's little angel tends to keep to herself and spends most of her time in her room playing with her dollhouse. She's always so clean and always so quiet. I couldn't have asked for a better little girl. I walked up to check Katie's room and it was empty. I then proceeded to check the rest of the house and found her nowhere, until I came to the door leading to the cellar. Odd, it was cracked. I pushed it open and started down the stairs. I could see the light spilling across the floor from the bottom of the staircase, illuminating a small puddle of blood just a foot from the bottom of the step. "Just hand me the gun," a voice said softly. "I'll get you out of here, take you somewhere safe." I rushed down the stairs and found Katie standing a mere 2 feet away from Detective Kimball, who sat bound with a rope and bleeding from the head. I approached my daughter and eased the gun from her hands. The detective seemed to eye me with the most dreadful gaze anyone's ever given me in my entire life. I took the gun in my hands and was surprised at how natural it felt, though I'd never held a gun in my entire life. The exhilaration that filled me as I lifted the gun and watched the detective's face contort in horror almost sickened me. "Why have you come?" I asked him as I aimed the gun at his head. "Your wife's death was not an accident," he replied. "I was at work when it happened, and Katie was at school. It's been deemed an accident, so what did you hope to find here?" The coroner stated that she died early in the morning, around the same time you leave for work. I loved my wife. Unconsciously, I began to pull the hammer back. "If you kill me, the police will know where to look," Kimball pleaded. "There's no way out of this. Do the right thing. Do it for your little girl." If you only understood. I put a bullet in his head. It's all I could do. Of course I knew he was right. I knew the cops would come soon looking for him. I turned to my little girl who stood staring at Kimball vacantly. I told her to run and get the tarp from the corner. She did. Daddy's little angel is so good. She even helped me wrap the body, and I carved. My sister-in-law showed up that night with her husband and kid as she said she would, and dinner was ready by 8:30. I really think they loved it. My new recipe? I think they'll be back for more. That was Daddy's Little Angel by Chris Phoenix, and what to say about that? Well, it got an 8.5 out of 10 on creepypasta.com. I have a feeling that might be going down pretty soon. I personally would give it a 6. It was an okay story. It didn't really blow me away at any point. The best part was the ending, which is good, so that made it a little better for me. It's just about kind of an insane father and his insane daughter, obviously. I just didn't really like the story too much. There weren't really any surprises. I honestly thought there was going to be this crazy twist ending. Like, I liked the way it was ended, but I thought it might be like a build-up to something you completely weren't expecting, like a perspective piece or something. And I don't know. I just think the base idea was pretty good, but I felt they could have done more with it. It was kind of just a basic story. And even though I'm a very basic bitch, I like my stories to be a little less than basic. So that's all I'm going to say about that one. I definitely preferred Mr. Widemouth, but the stories that involve kids are always super creepy, and Mr. Widemouth will probably haunt my dreams forever. Classic Mayor McCheese. But now it's time for some much-needed R&R. So today on R&R, I'm actually going to be reviewing neither a video game or movie or book. I'm actually going to be reviewing the Loot Crate for February. Now, I got it I got a little while ago and posted a picture on the Facebook and Twitter page. This month, I was really hoping for a pop vinyl or another t-shirt because last month's Voltron t-shirt was pretty awesome. I'm actually wearing it right now. But this month, it came with Ready Player One, a book that's supposed to be pretty good. So I was kind of excited about that. But then no pop vinyl, which I really wanted. They sent some weird Money World thing. Or Mummy World? I don't know. It's like a pop vinyl, but you have to draw on it yourself. So I didn't like that at all. I just want like a Deadpool pop vinyl or something. They gave out this month this weird deck of cards. I guess it's some weird game that Loot Crate invented. I wasn't excited about that. A hex bug, which just this little robot bug. It's kind of neat. And then a little Pac-Man poster, which was pretty cool. But my favorite item in the whole thing was probably just their pin. They always give you a pin for every month, and this one was pretty cool. It shows little board game pieces, and that just shows you how disappointed I was in this month's crate. So disappointed that I'm actually canceling the Loot Crate subscription I have, and I'm moving on to Horror Blocks. So if you haven't heard about Horror Blocks, it's the same thing as Loot Crate. They send you just this giant box of cool stuff, but Horror Blocks is 100% themed with horror stuff. So that suits this podcast more and suits me more because they always guarantee a t-shirt, and they always have awesome stuff. So for this month's Loot Crate, I'm going to give it a 3 out of 10. I liked last month's better with a t-shirt and a Space Invaders tie that I love to wear. So Loot Crate, I'm sorry, but I'm out. Yo. Onto the Horror Blocks. So that's it for the show today. Make sure you like us on Facebook, facebook.com/pastatimepodcast, on Twitter @pastapodcast, and send us an email, pastatimepodcast@gmail.com. If you have any requests on creepypastas you want me to read, then send them on down through the email, Facebook, or Twitter. And if you've written your own creepypasta and you want it to be read, or even if you just want me to check it out and give some feedback, you can send me that as well. I'm always happy to help, maybe give you some notes on your creepypasta. But that's it for today. Like us on Facebook, subscribe on iTunes.
Have fun trying to sleep tonight.